tapings or whatever, and it's really more informal. I mean, it's not going to be, anything formal, because I mean, we're all brothers here, just, we're going to be kicking it. And hey, you!
Okay, brother, you are.
All right, guy, get up against the wall. Let me see some ID, guy. They kill me with that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mama.
Oh, it's on?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Greetings.
All right, good evening, greetings. We're coming to you live from Urus, or Buffalo, New York, and from the Moorish American Society of Comprehensive Science, also known as the Moorish Society of Atmaurium, of the Talismanic Kingdom of Atmaurium. Let's see. Again, as I said, we talked about a lot of things yesterday about the United States. I know that's one of the areas of interest that our sister Bert Lockett has concerning the beginnings of the United States Corporation in and throughout the continental United States, i.e. the Americas. And but in order to comprehend the myriad of actual events in and throughout the Americas and the Moorish Empire on a whole, or to have an accurate anecdotal account, we must look and explore the events of the planetary and galactical conditions involving Mars, Earth, and the days of Atlantis. Now, of course, a lot of people will ask, well, what does that have to do with the United States? It has a lot to do with it. When we look at the events and things which occurred in Atlantis some 16,000, 20,000 years ago, and even 1,000,000 years ago, we can better comprehend and have an overall comprehension of exactly what occurred, or shall I say the cause and effect of ultimately what happened in the continental United States. So, we then consider early Atlantis, Kemet, axis, consciousness, grid changes, Ascaic logometers, which is another way of saying Akashic records, lifelines of those Akashic records, Moorish talismanic thaumaturgy. Thaumaturgy is basically another term that's used for magic or ancient magic. We're also going to look at the science of ancestral incantations involving thaumaturgy, utilizing specific tones and language or languages of light. We're going to look at genealogy as well as true geography. Now, I know that is a lot, but as I said, all of these things relate directly and indirectly to the history and the origins of the United States Corporation and why it was formed, etc. But as I said, going back to the time of Atlantis, when we look at about 20,000 years ago, there was a process that occurred that involved the Moors of Atlantis at that time. You also had Moors on Mars, and you also had Moors who were living underground at that time. These were masters, ascended masters from the sixth dimension, and I'll talk more about them in a minute. But the Moors that were actually living on Atlantis at that time, unfortunately, were involved in some experiments similar to that of the Philadelphia experiment in the 40s involving time travel. And unfortunately, they lost control of this experiment. And when things got out of control, ultimately it caused the cataclysmic event or destruction of Atlantis, the 10 islands of Atlantis. And in addition to which, it ripped a series of holes through a number of dimensions. And ultimately, that's what caused the problems that occurred in and throughout the Moorish Empire from that time up until the present. So as to questions about the decline of the Moorish Empire, you then again have to go back to these events, these experiments that they were conducting in Atlantis. And so when the time or the time machine experiment got out of control, as I said, it ripped holes in the dimension, and so consequently, it also caused an axis or planetary axis shift. And when the planetary axis shift occurred, it literally affected everything on the planet, including human memory or human memory retention, because human memory is largely dependent on magnetic fields. And the magnetic field of the Earth literally collapsed and was affected because of the planetary axis shift, and as I said, also because of this particular experiment that they were conducting. And so after this occurred, or after this time, you had many of the ascended masters from the sixth dimension who came back to Earth to assist the Moors that dispersed over various parts of the planet, of globe, in Kemet, in the Americas, and many other places, Peru, etc. And so, in order to assist the Moors, what they did was that they started a process known as stair-step evolution, because the Moors at that time from Atlantis had literally gone back into a state of barbarism, or so-called barbarism. They had lost a lot of the information, the sciences, etc., that they had once learned or mastered in Atlantis. And so, through a series of instructions, these ascended masters in what was known as the Tat Brotherhood, they would, through the stair-step evolutionary process, they would instruct these Moors in different areas of sciences in hopes that they would regain or recall much of what was lost. Unfortunately, such was not the case. It didn't really take. And so, unfortunately, thereafter you had a downward spiral that occurred. And thus, this is what brought in another experiment, but one of which was, or proved to be, a positive experiment in the creation of the ancient pharaoh known as Akhenaten, or some know him as Akhenaten. And anyway, Akhenaten was an immortal being who was created, and for the sole purpose of introducing what is known as Unamen's consciousness, or one mind or unity consciousness. And it was basically to bring the Moors to another level of consciousness, these Moors in particular, as I said, in Atlantis, who had lost a lot of their memory and the sciences. And so, in attempting to introduce the Unamen's consciousness, they did this through establishing what later became known as the ancient mystery system of Kemet, which actually stemmed from the Nakal mystery school of Atlantis. And in these schools, they instructed many of the Moors in many of the high sciences, breathing techniques, as I said, language tones or tones of languages of light, so as to raise their consciousness, to bring them in harmony with the grids. As a matter of fact, just backtracking a little, when the magnetic field collapsed back in Atlantis, or during the time of Atlantis, ultimately what happened was that not only did it affect the human memory, but it also affected the grids. And so what these ascended masters had to do was that they had to actually plug into the grid consciousness of the planet, the logarithmic spiral grids of the planet in various parts or key positions of the Earth, in order to, again, assist these Moors in helping to raise their consciousness. And so when we look at these different techniques involving the languages, the tones of the languages, etc., in particular ancient languages that you'll find, like for example in the ancient Moabite, the Aramaic, many of the Kemetic languages, tones, etc. The one thing of which I find to be very interesting that most people don't touch on, even for those that deal with etymology, is that when you're talking about these particular ancient languages and these tones that help to respatialize the organism so as to raise the harmonic level of the body and consciousness on a whole, is that these languages are actually alkaline-based languages. Now I know we think of, alkaline in terms of, foods, different types of foods we eat, etc. But these particular languages were alkaline-based as opposed to the acidic dialects and languages that we use today. As for example, not so much the English language. So don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with the English language per se, because it was actually one of many languages that was created by the Moors. It's just that the modern Albion, so-called English, European dialect that we've adopted is the problem. And this particular dialect is acidic and also electrical, as opposed to the alkaline-based languages of which I'm talking about, which are also highly magnetic. And so, again, when we look at these particular languages that I mentioned, they actually feed the melanin in addition to raising the consciousness, and they're high resonating. They're also carbon and silicon based, which are two of the most unique elements on the periodic table of elements. And so the carbon and silicon based languages that again feed the melanin, I should also include in that list Moorish Latin or ancient Moorish Latin. Now, all of these ancient tonal patterns actually mimic the pattern of melanin. As I said, as opposed to the acidic electrical dialect that we're using in the so-called English language. And which, by the way, when I say acids, I mean infectious or an infectious saturation of acids of the blood and bones. And this is symptomatic of what is known as Cretinism. Now, many of you know that the definition of Christian is Cretan and Cretan is Christian. But now if we take it a step further, we look at Cretinism, and Cretinism is actually a form of myxedema. Myxedema is basically an underactive thyroid or an underactive thyroid gland known as hypothyroidism, or Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which basically is a poor binding process of iodine to a group of amino acids of a glycoprotein made in the thyroid gland. And these amino acids are tyrosine residues in the thyroglobulin, or TGB, which are precursor hormones of thyroxine and triiodothyronine, T3 and T4. This particular iodine deficiency also shows itself in blood disorders, which again, like I said, this is all a pattern of the acidic dialect of so-called English that we're using. And thus is the reason why the European is so insistent on us using this particular dialect that works for him, in his customs, in what he calls law, but is not law, but is actually a custom being imposed upon us. But it doesn't really work for us for the simple reason of what I had explained earlier about it not being a magnetic, alkaline-based language. And so, as I said, this is also indicative of being linguistically strung out on methadone hydrochloride. Now, what do I mean by that? When I say methadone hydrochloride, in terms of this acidic language that I'm referring to and the pore binding process of iodine. I'm basically talking about a form of mathematics. So when we talk about language, we have to consider mathematics, we have to consider the helixography, the DNA and RNA of language, or the genetics of language, and a whole host of other things. But, as I said, so when we're talking about mathematics, we're talking about methodology. And so math is meth. Okay, so as a matter of fact, which is the abbreviation or slang for, again, methadone. So we're talking about a corrupt form of mathematics that has been imposed or superimposed on our people. Now I know this may sound kind of strange to some extent, because it's like, okay, you started out with Atlantis and you said that it has some relation or correlation to the United States and the United States Corporation, and it does, but all of these things have to be considered, as I said, in terms of cause and effect, to see exactly how this played into the dynamic of the Moorish Empire, the ebb and flow of the Moorish Empire from Anatolia to the Crimea, all the way back to the Americas, Latinum, known as Moorish Spain, and other parts of the Moorish Empire. In fact, not to get away from the methadone effect, is that, so we're talking about a corruption of language, and we're talking about a corruption of language, we're talking about something which is foreign and therefore barbaric, because barbaric or barbarian means foreign. And so when we understand it from that particular perspective, then we're looking at those who are on a day-to-day basis, meaning the Albion male, of whom again is imposing the acidic electrical or electrically charged dialect upon our people, are daily seeking convictions via their court system. And so when you look at the fact that they're constantly seeking convictions of our people, conviction is actually dealing with what? Language as well, because when you say something, you say it with conviction, as in the case of someone being convicted by a jury of their so-called peers. They're actually saying it with what? Conviction, and in addition to which is a form of damnation. So they're actually looking to convict you for eternal damnation in the Cretan system. And so this is what has played an integral part or integral role in, again, the dynamic of the Moorish Empire, particularly in and throughout the United States. So now, when we look at the beginnings of the Moorish corporate family trust, known as the United States, or more commonly known as the United States, it's important to understand that it was not originally known as the United States in 1774. That is what has become a common appellative. But if you do any research and you look at the Annales Continens, the Annales Continens is the Continental Records, which prior to that was known as the Annales Imperium, which was the Imperial Records. And now in the Imperial Records, you have what is known as the Consociuimus Regnum. The Consociuimus Regnum was a consolidation or a convocation of 13 royal families. Those royal families were Moorish families that basically consolidated their power for a number of reasons, of which I'll go into, in forming this corporate family trust, again, as I said, that we call the United States Corporation. And they did this under what was known as the Capitis Societas, known to you as the Articles of Association, and 3 years later the Capitis Civitatis, known as the Articles of Confederation. However, as you can see from the names that I'm giving, or the terminology that's being used, is that these documents were not originally in English. Many of them were in the ancient Moorish Latin language. Um, Again, as I said, if you do any extensive research, if you look in, there are particular sections in the Library of Congress as well as the Department of State Library, of which only very few people have access to, that will give you more information on the early years of the forming of the United States Corporation. At any rate, as I said, it was essentially or loosely termed Consequimos Regnum, which basically was an act. It was not a name per se that was used for the United States, because when you say Consequimos Regnum, Consequimos basically means that we have united, meaning that we have done something, or a group of us have done something, meaning we nobles or we membrana of this particular thing that we have formed, or these United Kingdoms. And so Consequimos Regnum was the consolidation or convocation of these 13 kingdoms. But what has happened with the whole United States aspect is that they've been using an indicative verbal action in the noun sense, or nonsense, if you will. Meaning that when they say the United States, obviously they're using a definite article, the, and so therefore using it in the noun sense. But when you say anything, even according to the rules of English, and you add an ed, like I walked to the store, obviously that indicates that you've done something as in a verbal action. And therefore cannot be used as a name or again in the noun sense. So these particular 13 kingdoms, later misnamed colonies and states, had rulers known as Beys, Beygs, or Beglabeys. These Bey titles were titles that were also used by the first ruler of China, known as Qinbai, and of course also used in the Moorish Ottoman Empire, more commonly known as the Ottoman Empire, the Bey or Bey title. But anyway, these Beys or Bey rulers on the continent in the 1760s and 70s were kings, princes, and governors owing allegiance to the Sultan at that time, Sayyid ibn Abdullah Muhammad XVII, who ruled between 1757 and 1790 from Marrakesh. Now Marrakesh at that time was Philadelphus or Philadelphia, which was both, this was a part of Mauritania or Mauritania, and Mauritania was actually in North and South Dakota, here in North America. And of course Marrakesh, as I said, was Philadelphia, and Marrakesh, which later became known as Morocco, means sons of Cush. And so this royal family, or convocation of royal families rather, the 13 royal families, some of the names, if you read in the imperial records or the continental records, as opposed to the congressional records, some of the names were Agenor, Agathocles, Ayak, Barca, which, by the way, Barca is another name or an ancient name for Chicago. And after Barca, it became known as Libya, or Ludim. And the people, the Moorish people, were known as Lahabim at that time. But anyway, as I said, one of the names, Ayak, the English equivalent, believe it or not, would be Ajax. So what they've done is the Albion has reduced many of these royal names and titles to toilet cleansers and other derogatory things, which I find to be very interesting. Now, also the name Agathocles, which, as I said, was one of the names of the royal families, is where we get the Aga title for governor, which is, of course, also used in the Turkish language as well. But anyway, as I said, many of these legal documents were not in the lingua anglicae, or the English language, until actually a century later. So again, you're looking at the time of the federal Christian European influence under bankruptcy reconstruction between 1861 and 1878, which was one of the reasons, apart from many reasons, of the Civil War, because it was to give them enough time to actually change or alter many of the salient records, to, as I said, to translate them, to omit things by, again, omission or commission. And so it gave them enough time to pray and alter these records, and to ultimately give you the popularized versions that you read today in your miseducation system. And so the original, of course, is always under lock and key, and you get the neutered version or neutered translation. But back to 1774, when the Corporate Family Trust was organized or created, one of the main reasons for the convocation or consolidation was due to the fact that the Moorish sway in the Americas was on the fast track of decline because of the 300 years continental wars between the Franciscan Dutch and the Mozarabs. The Mozarabs is basically another term, a name for Cretan or Christian Spaniards. Now during this time, during the 300 years continental wars, you had many of the older generations of Moors who were dying off. Many were prisoners of war. The newer generations were being born in war camps, and were now being nationally lobotomized via Cretan reclassification and socio-behavioral modification. And this is what Prophet Noble Ali is referring to in chapter 47, verses 16 and 17, when he tells us that through sin and disobedience every nation has suffered slavery due to the fact that they honored not the Cretan principles of their fathers or forefathers. And this is why the nationality of the Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the words Negro, Black, and Colored were given to the Asiatics of America who were of Moorish descent. So anyway, but the loss of nationality, even though it's understood that the nationality of the Moors was taken away in 1774, it's important to understand that the nationality meant the majority of Moors and not all of the Moors, including, for example, the royals of the Continental, what later became the Continental Congress, and about 1,000 Moorish factions. But understanding the seriousness of the situation, these Moors of the royal convocation, was again the fundamental reason for, one, the formation of the Corporate Family Trust, the National Trust, in again what later became the United States, and two, the establishing of the federal political system for the Albion male, as this was a part of the Moors' C3 Communications Operation Command Stratagem, or military strategy, that was used to, as strange as it may sound to some, it was to ensure the survival of future generations. You should also know that even though the Moors, or the Moorish Navy rather, more specifically, fell in West Palestine on the Sea of Galilee in 1795, the royal families nonetheless were still running government from behind the scenes until Civil War era reconstruction. So initially, the congressional membership consisted of the above 13 rulers and key family members that eventually comprised 35 members, and finally the 20 observers. Only the Bey kings, princes, and governors were eligible to serve as praisens, or president, commander-in-chief, of which there were between the years of 1774 and 89, 16 to be exact, who not only did they, like presidents of the modern era, sign congressional laws, treaties, military orders, but in addition presided over judicial congressional cases. And in 1775, under the Henry Middleton and Peyton Randolph second term administration, was the beginning of the so-called or infamous American Revolution. Now what's very interesting about this is because of how we've been, again, miseducated and taught history, etc., we tend to look at it compartmentally. In other words, we think of the American Revolution, okay, Crispus Attucks, that whole thing, and Boston, and Paul Revere, etc. and nothing else was going on. But as I mentioned earlier, you had a 300 years continental war that was going on in many parts of the continent. In parts of, Guaymicuna, known as Panama, Maco Tucana Huitoto, known as Colombia, Yonamam, Arawak Carib, Venezuela, Utuapaque Pima, Mexico, Maya, Guatemala, Araucanian, Chile, Diaguita, Bolivia, and Apibon, Paraguay. So in 1775, this American Revolution took place principally in the northeast areas of Brutium, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Idumea, which are known. Brutium was actually also known as Pergamos, which if you read the so-called Christian Bible in Revelations, they talk about Pergamos, which is Brutium, Massachusetts. Another name for it was Comassakumkanit, which I'll talk about that in a minute concerning Hano Bey's legal document, the Bornstone, which is an ancient document, ancient Moorish document, that I also talk about in Libretto 7 of the Consecrated Talisman, which is the Moabite Proclamation of Hano Bey, legal document annexation of the Americas to the Iberian Peninsula. Now, but anyway, getting back to Brutium and where the war, the American Revolution was principally fought, as I said, in Brutium, Massachusetts, Jerusalem, which is Jerusalem, also known as Fez Huetas or Old Fez, which is actually New York. Bethlehem, as I mentioned, is actually Pittsburgh, and Idumea, or Edom, is Virginia. Now, we've learned about the ruddy, pale-skinned man, or the so-called, the true red man, who basically settled in Virginia, and is actually where they were, how shall I say, immured in the penal colony for a time. But nonetheless, Idumea was actually Edom, and as you know, Edom means red or ruddy. So, as I said, principally between this war took place between the brutish Moors of Brutium, hence is one of the reasons why they were named brutish, and then you had the brutish or British amalgamated Moors of England, and these two factions were actually warring with the Albion, or so-called English subject male, and so, as I said, you had the two factions of Moors that were called brutish, and they were called brutish or British because of a covenant that they had between one another, or between the two families, as it were. Hence is where you get the term Brit or Brit, which means covenant, from the ancient Moabite in Hebrew. And we see evidence of this in the January 23rd, 1721 treaty between the Moors of Marrakesh and also the Moors of the amalgamated Moors of England. Now, just to backtrack for a minute, I talked about Comassakumkanit, Cape Cod Bay, Massachusetts, and the Bornstone, which, as I said, is an ancient legal document dating back to about 500 BCE, and this gets into, again, the whole land title issue. I also cover this, or talk about this, in Libretto 2 of the Consecrated Talisman, which is an absolute land conveyance document that's documented or recorded or archived in Homeland Security. It's in the Royal Archives of the Medina Sidonia family in Spain, Latino. It's also in the Department of State, etc. But anyway, this particular document, Libretto 2, is titled Geográficas para materia que familiae annalis Imperium Morosium ac Gentilicio Sanguinis, which is the Great Geodetic Survey and Family Chronicle of the Moorish Empire and its blood right heirs, which basically is a survey, a global survey, again, geodetic survey of the entire globe, giving you the metes and bounds, etc. And this document is to be used in conjunction with the Bornstone. Now, what's very interesting about that is also as to how we've been conditioned or trained to see things, is we think of these ancient monoliths, pyramids and things like that as artifacts, which is a term, a popularized term that's used by so-called archaeologists, grave robbers, whatever you want to call them. But these things are actually legal documents and should be used in every and all instances concerning so-called claims to land. And I say so-called claims because claim is actually an illegal term, but in terms of asserting rights, birthright inherited rights to the land, these particular monoliths, structures, etc., should be used as legal documents because in fact they are. So before I go any further with that, I wanted to know, were there any questions about that? Right. Okay. So anyway, I left off at the Bornstone, and in terms of it being a legal document, and the fact that it should be used as such in conjunction with, in particular, for the elementi about Maorium, Moorish Americans in general. And so this particular legal document, as I said, the Great Geodetic Survey and Family Chronicle, also known as the Book of Blood and Deeds, is Libretto 2, or Part 2 of the Consecrated Talisman, which the Consecrated Talisman, in and of itself, the whole book, is an absolute land conveyance document, legal document, irrefutable and incontrovertible by anyone. And as I said, it is documented and it's archived in the various governmental archives that I mentioned. As I said, also the royal family and the Duchess of Medina Sidonia. And let's see. But anyway, I wanted to go back to the starting from the 1721 treaty. Now, also what's very interesting about that is that this particular treaty was dealing with the issue of extraterritoriality between these two groups of Moors, and many of the treaties that they made during that time were also dealing with the same issue of extraterritoriality in many parts of Europe. So you had treaties between the Moors of Marrakesh and the Moors of Holland in the 1600s, like 1610, 1653, 57, 58. And many of these treaties, believe it or not, are still in force, as quiet as it may be kept. So you have treaties between the Moors of Marrakesh and the Moors of Germany, because as you know, the European system concerning what they call Germany today didn't exist until, I believe it is, 1873, 1874. So we're talking about treaties with the Moors of Germany, Bavaria, also the Moors of Thrace, Bulgaria, Herzegovina, Albania, Serbia. All of these places were actually still a part of the, and still are actually today, a part of the Moorish Empire, but also under the Moorish Osman or Ottoman rule, which I'm going to get into in a little while in terms of the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. And what's very interesting about that is that in the 1492 period of Spain, when they talk about, you know, the Moors falling in Spain and this, that, and the other, and it was the fall of the empire, that's not accurate or completely accurate, in that the Moorish Osman Empire at that time, 1492, and even going back 50 years before that or prior to that, was expanding, as I said, all the way from Anatolia and the Crimea to as far as the Americas. In fact, the expansion after the head of Satan was taken. In fact, Prophet Ubadr Ali talks about that in the 101 questionnaire. I believe it's questions 83 and 84. Where he talks about the head of Satan being taken. What's interesting about that is, I guess we can look at it, from the symbolic sense, in terms of so-called Roman rule, but actually what they call the Byzantine Empire didn't really exist. It was what is known today as Romania, Transylvania, etc. And I know Transylvania, of course, will conjure memories of or thoughts of Count Dracula, that kind of thing. And what's very interesting is that there was this part of the Moorish Empire was in 1453, around that time, was invaded by a Roman horde and led by a particular clan, the Dracul family, which was later known as Dracula, or the family of Dracula. And Vlad Dracul was Count Dracula, or actually Prince Dracula's father. And Vlad Dracul, who was a member of the Secret Order of the Devil, a so-called secret society, they were the leaders of this particular Roman horde who had invaded this part of the Moorish Empire. And so shortly thereafter, you had what has become known in history as the Ottoman Wars. And so it was during this time, 1453, where the head of Satan was taken, and the head of Satan was actually Dracula's father, that Mehmed II, or Muhammad the Conqueror, took. And so I think it was shortly thereafter that Prince Dracula was killed by the Moors during the war in 1462. And so after this, as I said, what it did was that it opened up the empire beyond belief. And so it was still flourishing in many parts of the globe, as I said, all the way to the Americas, in Brutium, as well as Mauritania, Algeria, which is known to you today as Minnesota. Algeria was also known, Minnesota, its ancient name was Numidia. I know many of the Moors, like Brother Asir, had talked about the Moors being known as Numidians at one time. And prior to that, they were known as Anamim. Prior to that, they were known as Gaetuli, or of the Gaetulian family. They were also known as Gadamantes. These were many of the names by which the Moors were known. They were the Patrusim, the Kasluchim. They were the Lubim, as I mentioned earlier. But as I said, this was in Numidia, which had opened up. You also had in Libya, which, as I said earlier, is Barca, Chicago. All of these areas opened up as a result of what took place in Istanbul, so-called Constantinople, 1453, believe it or not. And after this was done by Mehmed II, also known as Muhammad the Conqueror, the empire, as I said, flourished beyond belief. So I just wanted to veer off a little concerning that whole history, but I'm going to get back to the 1700s, the American Revolution era, and as I said, the beginnings of the United States Corporation. So in looking at the events, the history, etc., and the wars that took place, the so-called American Revolution with the Albion subjects, so-called English subjects, these individuals, though or despite the fact that they were warring with the brutish Moors of Brutium, Comasacum Canit, and the Moors, the amalgamated Moors of England, they nonetheless sought assistance from the royals, or the so-called Continental Congress, to construct and sanction what would later become the Declaration of Independence, so-called 1776 era. Now, the royals of the Congress, comprehending well the continental condition and the shifting of the balance of power, despite, again, the Albion conflict with the British, the royals factored into the equation universal and planetary conditions, which then, of course, takes me back to where I started with the whole axis consciousness grid shift changes. And I'm going to go into that. What's very interesting about that and the whole magnetic field collapsing, etc., what took place in Atlantis is that when we look at that in relation to what occurred then and what is expected to occur in the very near future, when you talk about these consciousness axis shift changes, and as I said, going back to the language issue, and one of the reasons why, you know, the ancients dealt with these particular melodic tones was that these, the magnetic field that I'm talking about, when it collapses and human memory is then affected, or loss of memory and memory retention, it is right before an actual shift in one, consciousness, and two, dimensional shift changes. Now, when we talk about dimensional shift changes, we of course give consideration to, again, the grid science. And when you're talking about the grids, as I said, ultimately also affect consciousness as well. For example, we're now in the third dimension and moving into the so-called fourth dimension. And when you have this movement of dimensions or interfacing of dimensions, one dimension tends to recede as the other dimension comes into view. Now, just to focus on that for a minute, what's very important to bear in mind, and when we talk about these consciousness grid shifts and changes, is and also trying to recall what occurred in Atlantis, that once this magnetic field collapses, when a magnetic field and a planetary axis shift occurs, there are a number of things that happen. One of those things is that you have a number of incidences that occur. You have chaos that's going on, or buildup of chaos on the planet everywhere. You have people literally losing their mind. We're actually close to that point right now. And when people begin to lose their mind, they of course don't really know what the heck is going on, or what the hell is going on. But what's happening is that there's a ripple in the magnetic field. And the ripple in the magnetic field is actually the thing that's affecting emotional bodies. Now, of course, for those of us who will in fact be aware of these particular changes, consciousness grid shift changes, will know exactly what to look for, what not to look for, what to do, what not to do. Also, when you have these dimensions interfacing, third, fourth dimension interfacing, and the grid consciousness and third dimension receding into the fourth dimension, this is a period of 5 or 6 hours that you have the ripple of magnetic effects. And when that happens, not only do you have, as I said, third dimension receding, but you have all of the objects in the third dimension receding. In other words, any artificial manufactured objects that exist in the third dimension begin to disappear. And as I said, a lot of people will be losing their minds because they won't know what's going on. And you begin to see images from the fourth dimension showing up in the third dimension. But it's important to recall that when this happens, that you're not to actually touch anything. As a matter of fact, this brings back memories of the first Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they were tied to the pole, and they opened up the Ark of the Covenant, and you had these spirits come out of the box, and Harrison Ford told the young lady that was strapped to the pole with him, you know, not to touch anything, in fact, not to even look at anything. Because what happens is that if you touch something or you look at it too long, or too long a period, you actually get sucked into the dimension too quickly. And when that happens, well, you know, you have a series of problems. But also, what happens during this time is that for a period of 3 to 5 days, when the magnetic field collapses and you have this consciousness grid shift changing, you go into a complete void, a black void. And your field of view and field of vision, everything just disappears until the actual dimensional shift. And so this is one of the things that we definitely have to be prepared for in the next few years. But so as to get back to the continental United States, that whole thing, in terms of the royals factoring into the equation, which is what caused me to veer off into the whole dimensional shift, consciousness axis grid shift change, is the universal and planetary conditions that they factored into the whole equation. Thus is why they gave great consideration to sanctioning the Declaration of Independence for these Albions. So they thought it prudent to grant the request and saw that these particular Cretans were among those that could be properly instructed in the science of government. So they wisely sought to do this as a means of long-range cicatricious. Cicatricious is basically a form of cicitration. Cicitration is the forming of a chrysalis or a scab, much like the one you form on your body when you cut yourself, and which was a means of healing the Moorish nation and the land as well over, like I said, a long-range period of time. So at this time, you had the fourth Praisens, or president, John Hancock Bey, and the rest of the Congress who agreed to sanction or authenticate the declaration of these British subjects and give them instruction under the tutelage of Emmanuel Muali Ben Bey Justice. It was also during this 7 years war period that the Moorish national flag was removed during the time of the Crow. And when I say during the time of the Crow, I'm talking about the Cornics, meaning the seventh Praisens, known as Ion Gracalus, but more commonly known as John J. Bey. And so, at this time, we have, concerning these particular events, which were all a culmination of the 300 years conflict dating back to 1494, during the Taurus, the Decretum Pontifex, or the Papal Bulls and the Treaty of Tordesillas, during the so-called Christopher Columbus Cretan era, involving the so-called Spanish conquest of Latinum Spain. I talked about Mehmed II and the empire opening up for the Moors. This was actually, as I said, during the time of the seventh ruler, Mehmed II. In fact, I would refer you to Libretto 13 of the Consecrated Talisman, the genealogy of the Imperial Dragon Court and Count Dracula. Also, Libretto 18, 720 questions to ask a Moorish American. So, anyway, the Ottoman Empire, as I said, opened up or expanded as far as Brutium, which Admiral, Admiral Ahmed Muhyiddin, Piri ibn Haji Mehmed, documents in the naval book known as the Kitabi Barre'i, including the world-famous Piri Reis Bey Portolano of the Americas as an integral part of the Moorish Ottoman Empire, which was the same map which was presented to Muhammad the Conqueror's grandson, Yavu Salim I, who was the ninth ruler in 1517. So the map was presented to him by Piri Reis Bey himself, and it's the most accurate map to date concerning the Americas, using both polar projection geometry, plane and spherical trigonometry, which is basically a fancy way for saying converting one form of math to another. Thus is why, when the map then resurfaced in 1929 in the Serre Library in Istanbul, the United States Secretary of State, or Henry Stimson rather at that time, via the United States Ambassador Charles H. Sherrill, for whom Henry Stimson gave a series of instructions to acquire copies of the map from Yusuf Uriel Bey, who was the president of the Moorish Historical Society. But basically, Henry Stimson wanted copies of the map for the sole purpose of finding evidence of the so-called Christian Columbus land discovery claim of the Americas. Unfortunately, only to find empirical evidence of the ancient Moorish presence in America. I refer you to Libretto 8, 360 questions to ask a Moorish American. Also, if I'm not mistaken, Libretto 7. So now this brings us to 1795 period. Selim Khan, who was also known as Selim II of the line of Muhammad the Conqueror, known as the most powerful of all the princes of the empire, commanding the two lands and the two seas. Now those two lands and two seas were Galilee and Libya, which, as I said before, known to you as Michigan and Chicago. Now, Selim Khan was the individual who entered into the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, or the Perpetual Treaty of Peace and Friendship, between Tunis and the United States of America. Now, Tunis, of course, at that time, as I said, was known as Tunis, but prior to that it was Funis. It was also known as Carthage. Prior to that it was known as Pornicium, which again is also Galilee. But now, as I said, Selim Khan also ruled the two seas. In addition to these two lands, the two seas were the Adriatic Sea and the Aegean Sea. Now, the Adriatic Sea is Lake Superior, and the Aegean Sea is Lake Michigan. But now, the interesting thing about this is that Selim Khan agreed to enter into this treaty in August of 1797, March 26, 1799, for the simple reason of the bellicose conflicts that were going on in and throughout the Americas at that time, and also, as I said earlier, the fact that the Moorish Navy had fallen on the Sea of Galilee in West Palestine, 1795. So now, what's very interesting about this is that no sooner than this was done, you had the beginning of what became known as the westward expansion of the Europeans, when they started basically bogarting and stealing lands all across the Americas, from Kentucky all the way to California. And the reason why I say from Kentucky to California, because these particular kingdoms, so-called states, were key in this expansion, starting from the Treaty of Greenville in 1795, the 1800 Harrison Land Act, and also the Yazoo Act of 1795. So now the westward expansion lasted all the way until 1890, Christian era. And as I said, the reason why the expansion started had a lot to do with seizing land, but also resources, and one in particular at that time was gold. And the reason why they wanted gold so badly, so desperately, was because their economy, such as it was always in a state of arrest and peril. And the economy and treasury had been seized by the bankers via the Bank of the United States, starting from 1790 during the Alexander Hamilton era, a few years prior to 1795, of course. So via the Bank of the United States, which was the predecessor that laid the foundation or groundwork for what later became the Federal Reserve Bank. But the Bank of the United States, you had the Bank of New York, which was Isaac Roosevelt's baby, who was, of course, the ancestor of Theodore Roosevelt, who came in with the so-called Square Deal. And then you had FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in '33, who brought in the New Deal. And so they were looking to acquire gold because they heard about the goal of the Beys, or the hereditary line of Beys, and the Khans, as in Salim Khan, which was in California. So ultimately, or the ultimate goal and destination of the westward expansion was California. Why is that? Because the name California indicates exactly what was there, because it was Caliph, California. It was the vaults of the Caliph. So you have, as I said, Caliph, and then you have Fornia. Fornia or Fornix is the Moorish Latin for vault. You've heard about Fort Knox. Now, Fort Knox, interestingly enough, is not any one place in particular, because Fort Knox actually means Fornix. Fornix means any vault, anywhere. And so, if you want to say that it is any one specific place, it would actually be 12 places, because you have vaults of gold in the basement or dungeon or whatever you want to call it in the Federal Reserve banks. The so-called 12 Federal Reserve banks, you have gold in the Fornix. So anyway, this should give you some indication as to, as I said, the whole California Caliph or vaults of the Caliph thing, and as to why they wanted to desperately acquire this gold. And so this brings us to the period of, as I said, the westward expansion, which continued from 1795 for the settlers in and throughout the Moorish dominions of the United States, had long since begun for the Spanish and the Franciscan Dutch from the 60th parallel of the equator, South America, all the way to the Moorish lands of the Negas in Eudacia or Judasia, today known as Burma and Myanmar. So again, like I said, you had this westward expansion in South America simultaneously while you had it going on in North America. And in South America, as I said, it had started long before, starting from the 60th parallel, going all the way up to as far west from South America to the land of the Negas, to Siam, to Malaya, to Sumatra, to Mataram, Java or Java, Borneo, the Moluccas, up to Mindanao of the Sulu Archipelago, to the Philippines, Hawaiian Islands, and all the way back to California, 32nd, 40th degree north latitude. And so, one of the reasons for this, on the part of the Spanish and the Franciscan Dutch, was that they were looking to, much like, for those of you who may remember the classic sci-fi movie Dune, where the whole thing was about controlling the spice. So you had the Dutch, who were trying to control the spice, or the so-called spice trade, and therefore had started what later became the Spice Wars. Thus was one of the reasons why the Moors in 1774 consolidated their power to form what later became Consortiumos Regnum, or so-called United States Corporation Family Corporate Trust, basically to protect the family interest that, as I said, was the whole continent of the so-called United States, and the empire, which is wait a minute, you recording?
Yes, it's recording.
Oh,
Terry just won't move.
I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille.
Just say testing 1, 2, 3. So you have time. So you ain't got to stand there once you cut it off.
When you go do the
You
close
edit that
up,
out.
when you go do the close up, I'm zooming in on the documents.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Whenever you say you're ready for a close up.
No, I mean, I was just kidding when I said that.
Oh.
Right. Okay. So, well, let me just say this. Brother Kwaku,
Yeah.
with regard to, and I know it was a lot of stuff I was talking about, and going back and forth and whatever. But did you have any questions about any of the aforementioned?
Well, let's put it this way. I'm more interested in not so much what's coming up. Let's not put it that way.
Okay.
What's coming up?
Well, as to what's coming up, we'll be focusing a lot on, as I said, things pertaining to the legal documents that I mentioned concerning land titles, muniment of title, holy appanages, cognitive trusts, and things of that nature. With regard to the legal document book that I mentioned, the Consecrated Talisman, and why it is in fact documented in many of the governmental archives here in America as well as other countries, and how it should be used, why it should be used, and as I had alluded to earlier with regard to the Piri-Reis Bay map, of which I know some people have in recent years acquired copies of it, but unfortunately don't really know what to do with it. It's to say, okay, I got this map, which is more evidence of, you know, the Moorish presence, and it was done by this guy Piri-Reis Bey, but now how do I, you know, make it, how can I use it in so-called modern time? So anyway, I'm going to talk about that. Things about the society, the Moorish American Society or Society about Maorium, the science behind different things.
May I ask, what role do you see this new president, Obama, play in this, all this?
Well, you know, what's interesting about that is that all may not be what it appears to be. And what I mean by that, on the surface,
And
you know,
and that could be.
right. And on the surface, and when you look at the fact, okay, you know, he's basically been elected president or whatever in their federal political system, and essentially he's going to do whatever they want him to do. But, you know, from another side of it, spiritually, if Spirit says that, well, listen, you're to do this, that, or the other, which may very well be to the benefit of your people, whoever your people might be, then who's to say what will occur? You know what I mean? Who's to say that at some point, while in office, he won't come out and say, well, you know, I'm a Moorish American, and so and so and so and so and so is the case, and I do hereby declare, yada yada yada, contrary to whatever their agenda may be for him. You follow? So it's an open book, really, and it can go anyway.
Then he has to have proof. Then he has to have proof, and that's the information that you already have proof of the Moors that you can speak of later.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Great.
But you know, we'll see what happens. You know, we'll see how it unfolds. So.
Now, all the stuff that I read over the years concerning the Akashic record, and it's revealing the truth and what Dr. York has said and others said. We go back to Reverend Valentine and deception. Are we falling for a deceiver? Is it possible that we can be deceived at this time? Mm-hmm. Everybody's saying about 2012 and
right.
feeling. My major concern right now is what's going to happen right now.
Right.
I don't mean right now, but
right.
It could be 2, 3 years, 5 years.
Right. Right.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I want to say that 12 is coming up. It's kind of Eight. Yeah, eight coming up nine.
Right. Well, that's interesting because then that goes back to something that I had touched on from, as I said, that whole experience in Atlantis when they were doing the experiment with time travel and whatever, and they had chose to conduct the experiment at a time that again was not the best time to do that in regard to what was happening with the planet. And I say that because we're approaching that period again when we're talking about the planetary axis shift. When a planetary axis shift occurs, there's a consciousness shift that occurs as well that affects the masses of people one way or another.
Right, right.
When that happens, as I said, there's a magnetic field collapse. When that occurs, you'll see a lot of things that will happen, as I said, because you're shifting into another dimension. And a lot of people won't make it into the next dimension, largely due, in fact, to their way of thinking. In other words, the line of thinking that people are on in the third dimension in terms of hate, killing, all of these things that are considered to be quote-unquote negative. When you go into like the fourth and fifth dimension, there's really very little space or place for that kind of thinking.
That's very true.
Right, and also during the time of the collapse of the magnetic field, one thing that I didn't mention, it's very important to mind your thoughts, because actually when that field collapses, you're in what is known as a great void or black void. And as I said, all field of view and vision disappears. So consequently, at that time, more so than any other time, is that whatever it is that you think, which we know that, you know, things are thoughts, thoughts are things, or manifest things. But at that time, more so than any other time, it's critical that you mind your thoughts, because whatever you think at that moment instantaneously will actually appear. In fact, once the actual transition or interface occurs from third to fourth dimension, for those that, for the most part, make it through initially, if they're not careful about whatever it is that they're thinking, they will immediately, instantaneously be snatched out of that dimension and thrown back into a lower dimension. And that's not a pleasant experience. Also, in fact, one of the things that I mentioned about the fact that the third dimension will begin receding and artificial objects and everything will begin to recede or disappear, in addition to which whatever clothing you're wearing will be gone. It will cease to exist. This is one of the things that individuals like Prophet Noble Drali, Akhenaten, the Pharaoh, who I said was an immortal, and Pharaoh, and the reason why he was the first to become Pharaoh and was chosen to be Pharaoh during that time in Kemet, was that he was a representation of what we were to become in the consciousness evolution. In other words, our level of consciousness since the time, right, since the time of Atlantis, when all of that occurred and all of the events and things that unfolded during the rise and fall of the Moorish Empire, those things were reflective of the number of chromosomes in the body, the 46 chromosomes that we have, which also correspond with the planetary grid around the planet. There's a morphological grid around the planet, as well as the grid that is on the planet or in the planet, the grids that are in the planet. And so when you had the masters like Tehuti, Kikwitek Ali Womalites, and other beings, ascended masters who were basically trying to reinvigorate the consciousness of Moors that was lost because of the collapse of the magnetic field at that time, what they were doing was that they were performing a kind of planetary acupuncture. In other words, they would actually literally plug into the grids of the planet, and they would, if you will, through breathing techniques, through certain thaumaturgical incantations, etc., they would plug into these grids so as to bring everything back into balance, as well as an attempt to restore the memory of the Moors that was lost, as I said, during that Atlantis period. So this was one of the reasons for the so-called 42 plus 2 books, or what they call the 44 Nefers, or gods. And Akhenaten at that time was basically trying to introduce something known as Unamen's consciousness. He was trying to introduce unity consciousness that at that time wasn't even thought about because of the fragmented state of consciousness amongst the Moors. So he, like Prophet Nubuddha Ali and many others in between that time or before that time, were basically trying to prepare us for this next shift that's about to occur.
Right.
So when he talks about Asiatics need to learn to love instead of hate and all of those things,
Oh, that's very
right, he's not saying it from the mundane level that most people in religion tend to
Right.
think of it. He's talking about it from a higher consciousness, evolutionary paradigm shift. You follow that?
Yeah.
Many of us lose or have lost. And so that's the whole key behind the morphological grid and the chromosomes and the representation of chromosomes. So the 46 chromosomes, the next level would be 48 chromosomes.
Now, am I mistaken that I was told that when this shift comes that the industrial military complex will completely dissolve?
Right, right. And like I said, nothing artificial will be able to exist. In fact, it's even not even recommended, not even suggested. If you're wise, you won't be in any artificial structure when that happens. You're going to find yourself, say for example, in a park, on a grass, next to a tree, or something that is real and natural. As a matter of fact, this is one of the reasons why many of the stone structures, like the pyramids and stuff like that, are the only things that tend to make it through dimensional shifts. That's why our ancestors had the wherewithal to construct these objects for, like I said, many reasons, and they knew that these things would actually make it through the shift. And this is one of the reasons why when archaeologists, when they do their little dog digging and grave digging and stuff like that, why they can't find but so many items or things from previous civilizations. They'll find a piece here, a piece there, because, like I said, the artificial objects could not make it through the jump. You follow? And so, saying that to say, when I talked about the chromosomes and why it's so important, because they play an integral part or role in the shift in consciousness. And when that happens, say for example, when you go from third dimension to fourth dimension, everything changes. Not only the structures and things around you that become 100 times or 1,000 times more vibrant, but in addition, which hence is why a lot of people are going to be losing their mind because they won't understand what's going on, but in addition to which, your atomic structure changes. This is why I talked about the importance of the language even more so than from the standard grammatical sense of what people deal with, but in terms of the tones, the particular alkaline tone, magnetic tones that correspond with helping the body to resonate at a certain vibratory level and frequency when the magnetic field collapses. So the body has to have a certain level of magnetic resonance on its own. You follow? So this is why in many of these ancient mystery schools, so-called mystery schools, one of the things that they dealt with was teaching the students on how to tap into these tones and frequencies so as to feed the melanin, you follow, and raise the vibration of the melanin and raise the consciousness so that you can meet the level of the shift or the dimensional shift, you follow, and so that you won't be left out when the shift comes. And so this is very key, and that's why I talked about silicon with carbon-based beings, but silicon, which is also known as the great magnet, which you'll find like it's important to eat silicon-based foods like
Now, when you say silicon-based food, explain it
for example, like
to me. I
and
know what silicon ain't number saying.
right. But what I'm saying is, interestingly enough, it's a unique atom in its structure, similar to that of carbon. Carbon and
Right,
silicon
right.
are the most unique atoms,
Right.
or elements rather, on the periodic table of elements. And many of your foods like beets, pomegranates, apples, etc., greens, are high in silicon.
Now, you know I'm in a tribe in
Right.
Africa. Okay, now my mentors, they're dead now.
Right.
But as they were teaching me in my tribe, I would sit among the masters.
Right.
And, the old man used to always give me charcoal,
Right.
pure charcoal. He would always take it and beat it up and give it to me and tell me to take it all the time.
Right.
And I still take my charcoal all the time. And that's the primary element
Right.
of the earth.
Right. Right.
And that are very powerful.
Exactly.
I try to tell people always, including in your menu, some dirt.
Right.
Some
Exactly.
charcoal.
Right, and it's very interesting that you say that, because in this so-called society and culture, they, make the joke about it, eat dirt and die, like it's a bad thing. And, that is so far from the truth. I mean, it's not even funny. But that's a very good point that you made about the charcoal. But yeah, so at any rate, this is part of the reason why the consecrated talisman legal document that I talked about, that is in harmony with many of the ancient legal documents via these structures, etc. As I said, many of the pyramids, the Born Stone of Kumasakunkanit, and other structures and things. In fact, what's interesting about that particular Born Stone, if you read it, it's actually inscribed in ancient Moabite. Uriel Bey, who was a Suffet, he was a magistrate of ancient Carthage, and it was Uriel Bey that actually inscribed on the Born Stone the annexation, the whole thing concerning the annexation of the Americas to the Iberian Peninsula, and essentially conveying the lands to his progeny and those of his line. It's just phenomenal. But anyway, like I was saying, that this is one of the reasons why I did the consecrated talisman, because it deals specifically with these ancient documents. One of my assignments, apart from introducing or reintroducing, as it were, because there's nothing new under the sun, the ancient language, in particular the Moorish Latin and other ancient languages, is actually restoring many of the ancient archives, and putting back into not only the archives on a planetary Earth level, but when you are dealing with restoring those ancient archives, you're also restoring or putting back into the morphologic field of the planet and the consciousness of the planet this information. You follow? So that way it is actually, how can I say, it is then put back into the consciousness or the memory of man, or in this case, in the memory of the Moors, this information. Hence is why, like I said, I've been putting it back into the Royal Archives in Spain, and the Vatican, and the Department of State Library, and other places like that, and the genealogical records in the Library of Congress. Thus is why, are you guys ready for the close-ups? But I guess we'll get to that. But anyway, that's why I did a document concerning my family genealogical record, or family tree, as it were.
Now, the Moors and Catholic Church, last week, there was something on the radio I was listening to. The Pope had a meeting with some more.
With Obama.
Okay.
Did a meeting with Obama wearing some $7,000 red shoes. And came over here.
I don't know about it. Obama who?
Obama.
The president?
What about
Yeah, yeah, the Pope.
Oh, he met with the Pope?
He met with the Pope.
Right.
The Pope came in to meet him, supposedly bowed down to his feet, wore some $7,000 red slippers.
Obama did?
No, the Pope wore that just to come see
yeah.
Obama.
Oh, well, you know what's interesting about he said the red slippers.
That's right.
What's interesting about that is in ancient times, the ancient Moors, in ancient Maur, which later became Rome, but in ancient Maur, in the government, what they did, which later became known as the Senate and stuff like that, but they wore red shoes, which basically denoted a certain rank in the government structure. And these red shoes were called galkei mulii. And so this was one of the reasons why they wore these red shoes. So it's no surprise or very interesting that you mentioned something about the Pope wearing the shoes and bowing
Right.
to the Asiatic.
Right.
You know, basically, I guess letting him know who he really is, whether Obama's aware of it or not.
Yeah, because Bobby Hemmett was in Cleveland, maybe 3 weeks ago, and
Right.
he showed a picture of the Pope with the shoes
Right.
and everything, and he also showed the whatever they call it, that had the Moor head
Right.
on his shield, or whatever,
Right, right,
as
right.
well.
Right.
So this is this is the first I ever heard that the Vatican or Rome was called, named after our ancestry when we controlled it.
Right.
See,
Right.
man, this
exactly.
history is awesome, brother. You did some research.
Right. And so anyway, that's why I was saying that the geodetic survey document is, as I said, it's a global survey and outlining the metes and bounds of the empire, the dominion, which actually, as I said, is to be used in conjunction with Libretto 7.
Mhm.
Right, so you have Libretto 2 and Libretto 7 are to be used in conjunction with the Piri-Reis Bay map. This, along with the Codicis Incantumentum. The Codicis Incantumentum
Not familiar.
is, this is a manual of spells. Right. Right, the manual of spells is a part of the consecrated talisman, and these particular books, along with the holy appanage and muniment of title, is all dealing with the issue of land title, the Moorish land title, and as I said earlier, irrefutable evidence concerning who in fact the land belongs to, the birthright inheritance of the Moors in America and throughout the world. And in fact, as I said earlier, you can go to the Department of State Library in Washington, and you can look it up. It's actually listed under 2 languages, bilingual, of course, in the Moorish Latin and also in the English. And you'll see the whole description of the land.
Now, I was told, I'm gonna tell you something. I'm not no spring chicken.
Right.
You know, I'm a little up in age.
Right.
But I was told when I went to federal prison and I was nosed as hell and just going through shit, I was like enthused about being a Moor
Right.
and all what I was learning.
Right.
I was told by some older guys in federal prison to not get my information from where I was getting it from.
Okay.
The direction I was headed.
Right.
And they told me, this is years ago, that do not get anything from the Library of Congress.
Right.
That's what they told me.
Mhm.
They said because everything come out of the Library of Congress is being watched and
Right.
monitored.
Right.
And that if I keep insisting on getting information from the Library of Congress, they'll put my behind on a to-watch list.
Right. Well, you know, what's interesting about that, were you finished your point about that?
And that by doing that, I would be watched from
Right.
that point
Right.
forward.
Right.
So they told me to hold off, and they would channel the information to me rather than for me to go to the Library of Congress and keep asking for this or for that, for
Right.
this book and that book.
Right.
Because they would monitor my movement.
Right. Well, you know, it's not to say that that won't occur with anybody asking for specific things.
I'm just telling you.
Right, or looking for specific things. But the thing with that is, and I understand the part about information being channeled, because what's intriguing about that is when I talked about earlier about the Akashic records, you know, a lot of the information I've accessed is from the Akashic records or Skaic logometers or lifelines, because, well, that's a whole nother subject about the lifelines of the Akashic records. But the point is, as I said earlier, the reason why I did that is because it was to a means of completion in restoring the records or restoring that whole process. In other words, as I said earlier, in putting this information back into these records, these archives, it's also going back into the planetary morphic grid, you follow, and therefore going into the consciousness of the people, you follow. So that's why it's imperative that I had to do this in putting the stuff back into the Department of State, the National Archives, the various sections of the Library of Congress. Now, what's interesting about that is, yes, you may be on a watch list for those that choose to go, but as with any, but
I wanted the information.
Right.
I didn't care.
right, but as with anything, it's really all in how you conduct yourself, how you carry yourself, what to say, what not to say, when you are looking for this information, whatever information it might be. As I had mentioned a few weeks ago on the radio, I think you had caught part of the show,
Right.
and I said that one of the reasons why a lot of people are unable to find things in the Library of Congress, for those that do go, is primarily because they don't know what to ask for. And if they do know what to ask for, they don't know how to ask for it, because the European, as you know, his thing is all about codes.
That's right.
You follow?
Sure.
And if he's not using codes in, say, for example, United States code book or whatever, code this, that, and the other, 11258, this, that, he uses codes in languages, and usually languages that many of us don't speak.
Right.
All right, I know this, for example, like, and then I'll draw a parallel with the national anthem of Mauritius. The national anthem of our country, Mauritius, is, which, by the way, Mauritius, all of this stuff as well, I didn't mention, is also documented in Homeland Security and U.S. Customs and Border Protection as well, including our passport. But Mauritius is also registered as a country or foreign country of manufacture as well, and recognized as a foreign country. You see right here, it says countries of manufacture, genuine copies of phonorecords, and protected work, United States and Mauritius. But at any rate, sort of lost train of thought. But I was saying that in our national anthem, one of these particular so-called passwords that they use in the Library of Congress is in our national anthem, right? So it's interesting that most of those passwords, if you want to call it that, are Moorish Latin words that that can only be used to access these particular areas of the Library of Congress, and then in addition to which, it's usually information predating 1492, right? So most of the stuff that we look for is usually 1492 on up to the present.
Right.
So if we're talking about 1492 to whenever, because rest assured, most anything that is in any other library in the world is in the Library of Congress. You know what I'm saying? Even though I'm not saying that, you know, that's the be-all, end-all, but I'm just saying if you know where to look and how to look and what to ask for, and how to ask for it, chances are, 10 chances to 1, you'll get it. Much like Prophet Noble Ali said, what? He said, go to those who know law and ask them in a what? Intelligent tone, and they will render you a favorable reply. So when he says ask them in an intelligent tone, he's not necessarily saying, okay, well, you know, this is an articulate guy, you know, and he sounds like any other European or whatever. He had a good miseducation, and he's, you know what I mean? So it's not even about that. Most of the time it's about the right word, and just one word. You see, so that's what I found to be very interesting. In fact, I'll say this much. One of those words, which I mentioned earlier, that's in our national anthem, which is the first or second word in that anthem, is incunabla. We say incunabla populima rosium es locorum qual cantare, amor diligere, which basically, the incunabla is saying birthplace or origin of a noble or royal and genteel people. But that particular word is one of the words that's used in the Library of Congress, and there's a section in there that is called incunabla. And as I said, everything in there is predating 1500, 1492. You follow? So, and it's not just there, it's many other places. Right. In fact, the archives of the Medina Sidonia family in Spain, Cadiz, Spain, which before it became Cadiz, in ancient time it was known as Gades. During the time of Carthage, or even before Carthage, during the Gadamantes, when the Moors were known as Gadamantes. But anyway, in the archives of the Medina Sidonia family, you have most of their records are like 900 Christian era, 1,000, 1,100. Very few documents or books or whatever that's in that particular archive is, you know, modern era, modern time, you know. And such is the case with most of the libraries around the world. You know, whether it's the Vatican, you know, whether it's library, because most of these museums in Europe, they have libraries as well as laboratories underground.
Now, could I ask you a question? Because, you know, I was a big fan of Dr. York.
Right. You and I both.
During this time. And, it's like right now, at first when he got arrested, and I hear a lot of the stuff that was said about him was not true.
Right.
And that, what's going on?
What I found out was when I was just in Atlanta, when I was in Vegas, when I was just in Vegas, back in June, I met the young man that studied with York, a young guy that studied York's writings.
Right.
And he wrote an article. He said also that the young lady that the government used to tell the lie about him raping or molesting her, what have you, she was told and came out, even though she's grown now, how she was forced,
Right.
and the family was threatened to be tortured or whatever, you know, that the family was involved, everybody to make this happen, to shut him down.
Wow.
Because his movement was moving too strong
Right.
to
Exactly.
educate and bring the light,
Right.
to bring truth, our kit to our cultural people
Right. Right.
of Asiatics.
Right.
And this brother says that he, you know, that they won't let him out even though the woman has come forth and whatnot. They're not letting him out.
Wow.
They fear him,
Right.
you know. And with that saying, the FBI doing what they're doing and so forth, the question to me is, I was telling someone that the FBI is a religious organization, you know, and I think I have followed some information from Brother Israel,
Right.
and that they were set up in Delaware, and they're like, there's another church
Right.
organization carrying guns.
Right. Right.
But if that's the case under church organization, and we claiming Christianity, and there are people claiming in this whole thing to Christ, this, that, and the other in Christianity,
Mhm.
and then you have the FBI, this, that, and the other, why is it people are still asleep and docile? They will
Right.
not accept that there's something wrong here with this picture of understanding what's the truth is. Because people think that America was built on Christianity.
Right.
And those are the other things that probably that you may need to speak on how this whole landmass somewhat was built, and the trueness of that date that you mentioned earlier of when Christianity came into the fold.
Right.
And when it came into the fold, that's when they gave us slavery.
Right.
And they made us study one book, which was their so-called Bible.
Right.
You know, and that's a shame that it's like that. You know?
Right. Well, you know, that's interesting. Because even though on one hand, see, we have to, I guess what we don't have to, but what we should look at is, when we say, well, this country wasn't founded on or founded upon Christianity, what do we mean when we say this country? You know what I'm saying? Are you talking about from Georgie Boy's time, you know, 1789, 1791, to the present federal political Christian system? Or are you talking about prior to that time? You follow? And then when you say country, are you saying country in the context of corporation? Are you saying country in the context of kingdom? Are you saying country in the context of kingdom, you know, being a part of the dominion or empire? You follow? So there are a series of dynamics here that are going on that must be considered when we talk about, well, it wasn't founded upon this or it wasn't founded upon that. At what time period are we talking about? You follow? And who are we talking about, and what group of people are we talking about?
I think what I'm trying to, well, that is pretty much broad, as you just
Right,
stated.
right.
So one of the things I think will be important is whatever is more pertinent or whatever it is for people to try to catch this here,
Right.
understanding
Right.
of who they are, because they do not know thyself. So by the thing that's been constantly put upon thy face,
Right.
or in thy face, is the cross,
Right.
Jesus Christ, and not understanding that J stands on 6 letters that wasn't even in the alphabet, and J wasn't even in there.
Right.
You know, this whole thing that they can research and find the trickery behind these so-called dictionaries.
Right.
You know, the air time of somebody bringing you this dick part ain't going to condition you to understand something,
Right.
you know, with this etymology trickery.
Right. Well, that's why I said when you deal with etymology, because obviously we're talking about a language issue here,
Right.
and when you're dealing with etymology, which is good when you know tracing a word back to its root or origin, Chinese, German, whatever it is, but unfortunately it has its limits. In other words, you reach a wall and you can't really go much further if in fact the language that you speak, or what is considered to be your language that you speak, as opposed to a word that you're researching that may trace its origins back to another language that you may not speak, then again, there's a barrier. You follow? So in order to have a better or even overall comprehension of the word that you're researching in whatever language or origin that it's in or of, is to better understand or comprehend that language in terms of knowing, as I said earlier, the mathematics of that language, the helixography of that language, the DNA and the RNA of that language. And when I say that, I'm talking about understanding it from a from a spiritual sense, the language, and understanding it from, of course, its contextual use and or sense. And once you understand the mathematics behind it, or the mathematics involved, then you cannot be brumagemmed or gerrymandered or hoodwinked concerning the technology used in the language that you pointed out. So now, of course, a lot of people will say, okay, well, so are you saying that, well, damn, I got to learn German, this, that, and the other, and all these other languages, not to mention the one I'm speaking? See, the problem with that is the European enchanted phantom, spook without spark, whatever you want to call them. A part of miseducation is that, much like many people have become, when they talk about fractions or certain types of math, and you know they get intimidated or they start to shake or whatever.
Right.
The same holds true with language. When you talk to most people about language, they make it sound like it's some Herculean task. It's very simple. Once you understand the mathematics, meaning the grammar, the casing, the stems, the root, and the conjugation, you know the language. You follow? And once you understand the conjugation, that means you understand how to, more importantly, how to alter and change realities, how to conjure, how to thaumaturgically or magically conjure things. Hence is what we did and have been doing, and thus is one of the reasons why you see on many of these movies, television shows, whatever, Supernatural, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I can go on, where you have these porks attempting to, via these movies, call upon things, spirits and whatever else, or tap into the spiritual realm using what? Ancient languages or tones that they have not the atomic structure or chemical composition to invoke in the way in which they want to. Hence is why, as I said earlier, these things mimic the pattern of melanin. You follow? And those beings or individuals who are heavily melanin concentrated. So that's why I always and have and continue to stress the importance of understanding language from its genetic standpoint, from its mathematical standpoint or viewpoint. And in so doing, you can then become the ultimate thaumaturgist. And that's actually a part of the science of, I mentioned it earlier, the science of, this is Libretto 9 of the Consecrated Talisman, the dialectic treatise of a Moorish American religion. Now, a lot of people get thrown by the term of the use religion, talismanism, but I'm talking about the science, much of which I talked about earlier with Atlantis and all of this, and the various sciences and things that we at one time mastered, but this goes back into the light languages and understanding the light languages from the tonal, vibrational, frequency, wavelength, because when you talk about wavelengths, you're talking about separation of dimensions. When you understand it from this point of view, then you can begin to conjure and manipulate whatever it is that you want, whatever kind of reality, like Neo did in the Matrix, and get instantaneous results faster or quicker than you would using the acidic electrical vibrational tones that the European has you using in his dialect, and thus is able to play the games that he's been playing via the so-called language. You follow? So, like I said, nothing wrong with English per se, because we were the architects of English, of German, German, French, Chinese, all of these languages. But the problem is that we got lost in the dialects. You follow? When we lost ourselves, lost our minds, and lost everything else. But now we're coming back into who we are. And so basically it's time to just basically put the pieces back together, and there it is. So, yes.
Go ahead, ask that question.
Go ahead.
So the people know, which we know is in your holy talisman, they need to know the breakdown of the word Akmirium.
Right. Now the breakdown of Atmarium basically is very simply is love's neutral place, which is basically dealing with light, light frequencies, sound, again, language, but essentially it's love's neutral place, meaning that it's dealing with much of what we talked about with the dimensional shifts, etc., and preparing our minds, our essence, our spirit for the shift. And that's what Maorium is about, from the mundane to the monumental. You follow? From the physical to the spiritual. And so when we talk about love's neutral place, we're talking about Samhita ad Maorium. Samhita ad Maorium means path to ad Maorium. What is the path to ad Maorium? The path to ad Maorium is the path to unity. The path to unity is what? Path to unity is forgetting the self. And I know that sounds weird when I say forgetting the self. When you forget the self in the context of unity consciousness, which is what Akhenaten and others and Prophet Gujar Ali was trying to introduce when he talked about unity, he was saying it in the context of universal and a united thinking in terms of the collective. Matter of fact, you may remember Star Trek, The Next Generation, and all of that when he talked about the Borg. And the Borg's whole thing was about the collective. You follow? And they were, of course, always seen as the bad guy. But in actuality, they were representing something dealing with higher levels of unity consciousness, which basically is dealing with a state of enlightenment known as paripasu. Paripasu basically is a state of enlightenment which is neutral. You follow? And so that's part of what Atmaurium is too, when at the end of the word Atmaurium, is neutral, basically representing neuter, male and female, however neither. So that's why rather than Allah, for example, for those from the religious aspect, rather than Allah, the so-called masculine aspect in the Arabic, and Alat, the feminine aspect in the Arabic, we say Alut in the Moorish Latin because it encompasses male and female. Or even as Brother Asir often says, the creator and the creatrix, or creator, creatrix, or creatricis. And so therefore you have the union and the unity thinking and the unity mind meld, etc. So we basically, what we're trying to do is to get ourselves back to unity consciousness, unity awareness. You follow? So I hope I've answered your question.
Okay. You keep speaking about the talisman. Just grab the original talisman so that I can hold it up, and then we want to let them know that it's been broken down into segments for the movements.
Right.
So that they'll know that.
Right. Now this is the, you see the cover here, and so there's no writing on the front, but on the inside there is. But the consecrated talisman of the Moorish American Society of Comprehensive Science, or the Moorish Society of Maorium, which right here are the first 8 books. It's actually currently 19 books, which some of which I've showed you earlier have been broken down into pamphlet form, 19 in all, and it's a total of about 1,000 pages or so. And it covers everything from, as I said, cognitive trusts, land titles, to thaumaturgy, which basically is dealing with high magic. It's dealing with incantations. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I failed to mention in terms of incantations, ancestral incantations, which is also a hereditary legal formula. A hereditary legal formula is, for example, and something we've gotten away from, is national anthems. A national anthem is, for example, anthem means carminis. Carminis means song. And so songs are essentially chants or national anthems where you are invoking the spirit or the essence of the ancestors, calling upon those predecessors from other dimensions, other realms, etc. So this is also what it deals with. It also deals with health, with herbology. It also goes into so-called medicine, so Western medicine from that side of it as well. So you can know the difference between that which is natural as opposed to that, and when I say magnetic, as opposed to that which is electrical or acidic. The talisman also deals with, economics, Moorish economics. As a matter of fact, here's one of the books dealing specifically with Moorish economics, which on the face of it you can see the Filleti or the money about Maurium, which I can show you in a second. You can see close up or closer as to what the money about Maurium looks like. And also the talisman, Libretto 15, that was the economics. Moorish economics is Libretto 16. Libretto 15 is something of which I thought was necessary and much needed for the Moors, specifically dealing with the whole jurisdiction issue. We've been having a lot of problems with the jurisdictional issue, and not to say that any of what the Moors have been doing over the years is wrong. It's just that, you know, you're dealing with a beast and, you know, he doesn't respect or honor anything. But one of the other working tools here, dealing with the treaty, which is something that Moors, unfortunately, when dealing with the jurisdiction issue, 9 times out of 10 do not present the treaty, or they do not present it in a legal fashion or a lawful fashion. In fact, I have here a
Kind of original documented government
Right.
seal.
Right, I have a certified copy from the National Archives of the Moorish Treaty in both the English and the Arabic. And in addition to that, I have what I constructed is a legal guide on how to actually use the treaty. Okay? In fact, on the inside page of the front cover, I have a letter here from Homeland Security recognizing the talismanic kingdom about Maurium, as well as the money about Maurium. Not that we need their recognition, but just for posterity's sake, as it were. But this legal guide basically deals with each article, the breakdown of each article, what those articles are about, and I'm even going into it from the translation and transliteral aspect of it, even using many of their own translators, so-called authorities, on the breakdown of the treaty, and how in the treaty, even if you want to say that the treaty was made between the Moors and the so-called federal Christian government, even though in actuality it was made between 2 groups of Moors, but even if you wanted to say that it was made between the Moors and Christians, well, according to their own translator, the translator breaks down that when they say our Lord, they're talking about the Sultan. When the so-called Christians say our Lord, they're talking about the Sultan of Marrakesh or the Sultan of Morocco. So what is that saying? It's saying that they were and still are vassals, and hence is one of the reasons why they had to pay the tributes, the yearly tributes, 40,000, 20,000, 100,000, whatever, in gold. As a matter of fact, I refer you to another certified document, of which I'm going to give the brother Israel. Right. Another certified document, which is from the Congressional Record, 3rd Congress, 1st Session, December 16, 1791, talks all about the tributes that they had to pay the Sultan of Morocco as well as his son for the use of the dominions, and how George Washington tried to hide this fact in the Congressional Records. Right. Concerning the use of the dominions. But at any rate, yeah, how George Washington tried to hide the fact in the records of how they had to pay these annual tributes, as I said, in 20,000, 25,000, 50,000, etc., which would be the equivalent of, you know, millions of dollars today by the so-called inflationary standard.
And the way to get in contact with you, because you have some elderly that do not have the computer.
30 seconds.
Right.
So do you have a
Right.
phone number
Right.
that you can get in contact? Because you
right.
have some people
Website.
that don't
Right.
have no website
Right. We can be contacted at area code 216-283-5529, Moorish American Society. Also 716-283-2807. All right, so for those of you who don't have computers or any of the technological gadgets.
And this has been?
This has been brought to you by Talismanic Kingdom of Almaurium, the Moorish American Society of Comprehensive Science, and I am the magnificent Prince Kabir Uriel Bey.
Excellent. Excellent.
Right. Now that may be,
There's gonna be another one. We're gonna do another one.
right, okay.
So that way you get a break.
Not a
Ooh,
problem.
women, I must have a 6 hour one. You see what's going on here? Oh, let me stop it.
Right.